Hey everyone, welcome to week 38. This is day 5, last day of our What Can I Learn From Rembrandt week. And for today, we're going to concentrate on the last aspect of the things that we could learn, that we could pick up from Rembrandt and try to apply them into our practice. For me, this is a cool day and it kind of encompasses all the aspects that we've worked on during the week. But I'm going to call this one flesh. We'll see how we do. Remember, next week, this is probably going to be still an empty apartment, but next week, new theme. So we're going to be here. So we'll see you there. Bye. Okay, let's get started. Now, this is our last day. This is day 5, Friday of our ongoing What Can I Learn From Rembrandt week. And remember, this week has not been about trying to paint like Rembrandt. That is an impossible task. If people feel that, painting like Rembrandt was the end goal and that there are people out there that can faithfully show you how to paint like Rembrandt, then please, I'm the first one to say, oh my God, go watch those videos. I'm sure that in terms of formal qualities of paint, of the construction of a painting, there are invaluable lessons in trying to emulate, in trying to replicate how a Rembrandt painting was done. I think that we have the knowledge to establish how a Rembrandt painting was produced. That is kind of easy because we know how Baroque paintings were painted. We know exactly the character that the act of painting had in the 17th century. There's no weird surprises there. Colors were produced in fashions that we understand. Substrates, surfaces were primed in ways that we completely comprehend. Brushes were manufactured in ways that we can find familiar. The mediums that they used are mediums that we can very much use nowadays. So if we wanted to try and formally paint like people did in the 17th century, we can. We can actually go through great efforts to try and do that. I don't know what we would be gaining by doing that. Probably a immense appreciation of what they went through and a deeper understanding of how painting was understood in the 17th century. We can't really completely understand it because we live in the year 2020. But we can try to shed some light as to how somebody 350 years ago was thinking about painting. So I think that that's a fascinating thing. But to think that that guarantees in any way that our painting is going to be able to grab some of that glory that belonged to amazing masters that lived in that era, no. That alone does not guarantee a great painting, a solid painting. There are countless of painters nowadays, today, that are doing paintings that can't be farther from Rembrandt's. I showed you guys last week Doran Lambert's paintings. I've showed you Anthony Cudahy's paintings. I'm sorry, Anthony, I'm butchering your last name. There's a ton of painters painting nowadays that don't really have to lean up against, Baroque painting to justify their own painting. So, no, just by association, we are not going to be great if we try to paint like Rembrandt. That is kind of weird to even think that. What we're trying to do, again, and hopefully I can pose an example to you guys that can be pretty cool and that I think sort of illuminates what we're trying to do with this whole process. While I was looking for images to show you guys for this video, I came upon some of the drawings that I had saved from Rembrandt that we showed for Wednesday's video. And when I was looking at those drawings, there was one drawing in particular that reminded me of a Rembrandt Brun drawing. And Rembrandt Brun was an amazing, mid-20th century Italian-American artist, sculptor, draftsman, graphic artist. And there are a couple of his drawings where there's this gorgeous expressionistic calligraphy to that drawing. There's beautiful line weight, everything that we would come to expect of drawing like in the, 50s, 60s, and 70s. That made drawing like a true powerhouse. Drawing as a language became incredibly powerful. And I actually love one particular Rembrandt Brun drawing. I think that sole drawing is just a masterclass of line weight, of how to understand line weight. I think it's amazing. I think the range, the gamut that is covered by all those, strokes and the decision making is just absolutely brilliant. You could just look at that one drawing and say, okay, I kind of understand what a lot of 20th century drawing is about. And I think it's a brilliant drawing. I think it has to be one of those powerful drawings of the 20th century. And I always have that drawing in my mind. And when I was looking at this particular Rembrandt drawing, I was like, oh my God, everything that I see in Lebrun's drawing is in Rembrandt. Rembrandt was doing this 300 years before Rico Lebrun. One could argue that there's a lot of things that were done, centuries or maybe even millennia before other well-known artists were doing it. Art is very weird and it tends to be cyclical at some points. And truth is, we don't really know where art is headed. I mean, if we knew, then art would be the most boring thing that our species could do. But its most fascinating quality is that we don't really know, because it actually goes hand in hand with society and with how we as human beings, we as a species, change and evolve and mutate. So we have no idea where we're going to be in 50 years. And the fact that we don't know where we're going to be in 50 years means that we have no clue what art that is going to be produced in 50 years looks like. We have no idea what painting or how painting is going to be understood in 50 years, how it's going to be defined. I don't think it's going to be seen as something that's obsolete. I really don't. I think that argument is kind of long gone. Painting can always be a partner in our creative process. How we're going to understand painting, if we are going to paint with physical paint, if painting is going to be produced, in the same fashion that it has been produced pretty much for the last, 6 centuries, I'm not sure. Maybe painting is going to change dramatically, but the core of painting, the idea of painting, is still going to be there. And I think I find that quite fascinating. And in the same way that I think that what Rembrandt did mid-17th century can kind of peek its head and show up in a drawing that Lebrun does in, mid-20th century, it's actually quite amazing. And there's nothing that anyone could ever say to make me believe that that sort of thing won't happen again. Maybe what we're doing now is going to peek its head, in the 23rd century, and it's going to be amazing. But we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with painting and the way we're going to define it and the way we're going to actually paint. Maybe painting will have to do with 3D printers in the future. Maybe painting will have screens and virtual spaces, and there's going to be virtual paintings that you can experience in dramatically different ways. Just imagine painting a virtual painting and then, inhabiting that virtual space where you can actually experience that painting up close and you can touch it. The possibilities are just endless and super exciting. So maybe the idea of painting doesn't have to do with paint in the future. And that to me is actually something that I absolutely love. People know this about me, but I love illustration. I am an illustrator at heart. And in that sense, I also adore the animation industry, the video game industry, all these people that work in concept design. And I have experienced the work of geniuses like Craig Mullins, who's just a pioneer in digital painting. And I have seen how that has evolved into a tool that can be used by so many people nowadays, like Procreate, that is so accessible. And the incredible results that these younger generations can actually garner from these tools that are very different in nature from the ones that I was brought up with. But it doesn't matter. In the end, we share the same DNA. It sounds weird to think that Procreate and just a tube of paint can kind of share things when they are completely different in their nature. But the philosophy that upholds the idea of painting is the same for a painting done in Procreate than a painting that is painted with gouache or acrylic or oil. To me, the idea of painting is a constant. And it's incredibly exciting for me to consider that is going to be always alive and it's always going to be our company. Now, one of the things that is at the core of that idea of painting being our company throughout millennia, hopefully, is the fact that it's based upon our contemplation of nature. And by nature, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go outside and just experience a sunset or listen closely to a running stream or have a wind kind of blow our hair into our faces. I don't know what that feels like anymore, but you guys can tell me. It doesn't mean that. Experiencing nature could mean a very introspective thing where it's not about that place that is outside. It is about our place within that bigger idea of nature, our role in that vastness of nature. And we can contemplate those things, and we don't necessarily have to be, at the peak of a mountain after a wonderful walk. If we could do that, that's great. But sometimes our reality means that we have to be in a tiny apartment and our view is just a brick wall right in front of us. And that is very much true for a lot of us out there. And we have to understand that we don't really need to escape to this outside idea of nature to think about our place in nature. And I think that nothing has been truer than this year for a lot of us, understanding how weird it is to just occupy this single space and move within this single space, and the efforts that we have to go through to maintain our humanity and our sanity. But I think that that's a reminder of how we really need to work hard at maintaining that sanity and humanity, regardless if we go outside, if we have these walks, if we can breathe, fresh air, if we can look at these wonderful sunsets. And for me, throughout this whole time, it's been about looking at the four walls that compose whatever definition of home is, my apartment that I share with Dani and that I'm very grateful to share with my kids, every other week, and just being able to share with them just time and space and seeing them grow in this very, very weird context. But just that closeness, I feel, has made me realize that painting can also survive in these very narrow spaces. And that painting is always going to be this kind of life force, if we let it, that even though it's born in this, tiny, almost asphyxiating little space, it almost becomes this empowering, again, vast force that becomes this almost living, breathing thing that can't be contained by these tiny four walls. The same way the universe is incredibly expansive, painting becomes a vehicle to access that vastness. And I think that that's incredibly, incredibly fascinating. And it may seem like nothing, but whenever I see these echoes that are done throughout centuries in art with Rembrandt's drawing and Brun's drawing, and whenever I kind of see myself trying to breathe some of that same air, in the sense that how Rembrandt, for example, looked at this particular painting of Hendrik that's at the Met with these oversized irises and pupils, and where I feel that he really, really looked at her. It wasn't his subject matter, it wasn't objectifying, but there is a sense of that human being that's Hendrik. I realized I can speak about that. I can speak about that flesh and bone that is Dani when I'm looking at her. And I guess that was the theme that I was going to concentrate on for today. That was the aspect for today. That was flesh. I know that I started talking about something else, but I thought that it was very, very important to draw those parallels between these echoes in history and how I feel I'm in many ways doing the same thing. It's almost inevitable. It's not that I'm special. It's just that those things are there. They're fruits that they're always going to be in season, and they're going to be there, and they're ripe for our taking if we want to take them. So for me, that exchange, looking at this character made of bone and this very mushy, soft flesh, was very important when I saw Dani and when I said, I want to engage with her and I want to look at her and I want her to look back at me, and then she can look at me looking back at her. And we fall into this infinite cycle of just gazing into each other's eyes. And I know maybe that sounds corny, but I think that when I look at Dani, I have that feeling. I think that I can look beyond, what her simple form is, and I can see and experience her flesh and her squishiness, but I can also go past it and understand that her humanity lies beyond that very physical aspect of form where Rembrandt just completely shined. I think that he is, one of the most amazing painters in history at depicting flesh. And I'm not talking about skin tone. I'm talking about the palpable physical quality of flesh, of the softness that is that tissue that's underneath the skin and on top of bone and muscle. I think that nobody painted better than Rembrandt in that sense. And I wanted to try and think of that painting of Hendrik while I was painting Dani. And again, also find my place where I'm just saying, hey, I'm here 350 years later, just contemplating Rembrandt and saying, wow, I can see how some of those teachings, some of that very valuable information that lies within his paintings can be applied to a very simple exercise of me looking at the person that I love the most, which is Dani. So it was very cool. It was very, very cool. And I think that, in the end, if you really think about it, that is always going to be so much deeper and so much better than just saying, oh, I'm going to do this exercise where I try to paint like Rembrandt and I'm trying to emulate this technique and replicate this technique. That is finite. Trying to paint like somebody else has an end goal. You will inevitably, if that's your life's effort, you will get really close to understanding how a particular painter solved a painting. But when you get there, what else is there to do then? Was that it? Was that the goal of life? Just to try and paint like somebody else? When you think about it that way, you realize that that is so small, again, in the grandness that painting can become, that, I don't know, it serves no purpose to think that that's where all the answers lie in, and that's where all our efforts should be put into. That was it for this week. Again, thank you guys for all the warm wishes that you guys left for Dani. She's my driving force. So without her, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. So the team is strong again, and we're going to have a new theme for next week. So as we say on Friday, thank you guys for letting us be a tiny little part of your life and letting us be your company during this week. And hopefully you guys will give us the chance to let us be your company also for next week, when we have a new theme. So we hope to see you next week. Thank you again. Bye.